So you may have heard of the phrase rule of, and it's everywhere. Rule of is the sum of your revenue growth rate plus your profit margin. And it's all the rage. To be rule of 60, rule of 50, rule of whatever. You want rule of bigger is generally the view. And while I love the elegance and simplicity of efficient growth as a concept, I do not love rule of, because implicit in rule of nomenclature is somehow all rule of is created equally. And so I've been playful in creating the rule of insight. It's not insight's rules, it's just insight into rule of. That not all rule of is created equal. Not all rule of 40 is the same.
So what metrics are important in early stage? Early stage is a very broad definition. Sometimes early stage means a company with a couple of people, a prototype, and a couple of design partners. Sometimes early stage means $2 million of ARR across like 25 customers. So it a little bit depends on the stage. In the very earlier stages of companies, when you don't have really data on renewals, it's best to see customer usage data. Usually customers who really engage with the product, maybe it's something that they use on a daily basis. Maybe it's used by companies where there's large teams engaging with the product. Those are probably the best predictors of renewal rates. And in subscription software, renewal rates are everything. If you don't have a very sticky, high cross-tension product, you're not going to be able to build a big business.
Investors care about all the core SaaS metrics when looking at a SaaS company. What's your NRR? What's the market pool? What's your cost of customer acquisition? What's the customer lifetime value? What's your churn rate? All those core metrics. Investors also care about, are you measuring them correctly? So it's not just around the fact that you have these metrics, but are you instrumented to make sure that you can respond to what these metrics are telling you? Can you double click down on the metrics and understand where your conversion rates are, which salespeople are succeeding, which customer verticals are more profitable than others, where your churn is coming from? So we care very much about the headline metrics, but we also care about what's driving and the underlying data that supports those metrics.
How would a founder present themselves to an investor if they don't have meaningful revenues yet? I think the best way to do it is to highlight the customer stories of how the product is being adopted, what kind of customers are using it, what problems are they solving, how is it changing the life of the end user, the customer. Someone once told me that the best indicator for enterprise software is that it gets someone promoted in the customer. So if you can really show that you have these evangelists at the customer and how their job becomes better, maybe they get promoted or otherwise recognized, that's usually a good predictor for a successful product, and kind of packaging that all up for investors to consume when you don't have quantitative data on metrics and revenue can be useful.
Investors also care about TAM. The reason why TAM is important is we need to know that you'll be able to sustain growth over the long term. We need to know that there's sufficient market runway, that if you churn through some customers, there's a lot more to go and get. In a vertical market that is constrained by TAM, if you churn through customers in early stages because you don't fully have good product market fit, or because you have a competitor or you haven't priced correctly, and you churn through customers, it may be very hard to get them back. And there may not be that many more to go after. So one of the reasons we really care about TAM is making sure that there's it's sufficient runway to experiment, to make sure that you can learn and iterate as you find the right ICP, as you find the right set of target audience, and that audience is going to be there for the long term, and that is enough of them to help you sustain your growth.
We would happily trade 40% durable growth and zero profit all day for zero growth, 40% profit. The first one is way more valuable. And so if you're curious about rule of and how it works in value, our big push to you is don't just look at rule of. Look at the components that make up rule of and understand how each driver in your business affects growth and profit and how they work together. For visualization, I make the comparison of these rule of components, these rocks that build up rule of insight. I use a sweater analogy. And in the sweater analogy, if you imagine what happens when you take a knitting hook, stick it through your sweater and pull. Like, yes, you can see that thread pull and you see a thread pull. But if you look on the back, there's probably some weird bunched up stitches in the back that don't look directly connected to where you're pulling, but they're clearly affected by having this sweater tugged on. rule of components kind of work like that. If you start manipulating one of the variables, it has an effect on the rest of them. You can't spend less on G&A without potentially affecting the ability to deliver your product deadlines. You can't spend less on R&D without having some effect on retention rates or perhaps the cost to renew. So each of the different pieces of an income statement indirectly touches all the other pieces. And revenue growth is just the output of what you've created. And so is profitability. It's an output of what you've created. They're not the inputs, they're the outputs. And so this whole basis of rule of is to not just focus on the outputs, but to really focus on the inputs.